want to introduce our third keynote speaker of the conference, James Whitehorne. Working on local and state redistricting for the last 20 years and knowing the challenges local governments and states face during this process, I knew I wanted to have James speak at this conference. James and his staff are responsible for providing all the nation's PL 94-171 data, block level population counts by race and ethnicity for the required process of redistricting. The Redistricting Data Program James manages allows Wisconsin to provide critical updates to the data that is released to make it more accurate. In my opinion, the state of Wisconsin has worked hard to become a great partner with the Census Bureau. This partnership should result in more accurate data delivered to Wisconsin for this vital process. James is the chief of the Census and Redistricting and James Whitehorne is the chief of the Census Redistricting and Voting Rights Data Office, where he manages the Redistricting Data Program and the Section 203 language determinations required by the Voting Rights Act. He began his career at the US Census Bureau as a geographer in the Geography Division, working and eventually leading the effort on the geographic support to the Redistricting Data Program, as well as the Statistical Areas Program, which includes census tracts and block groups. Before joining the Bureau in 2006, James worked on contract for 5 years with the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice as a Geographic Information System specialist. James holds both a BS and a BA in Geography from Pennsylvania State University, PSU. All right, please help me welcome James Whitehorne to the stage.
If this is good, if I start talking away from the mic, someone just give me a note. I was told that it doesn't have much of a range. But I want to thank Tony for the invitation to be here and the Wisconsin Land Information Association. You guys put on a fantastic conference, so I'm actually really happy to be taking part. I'm also very happy that by the time I get home, when I tell my family about it, I'm going to tell them I was introduced by the University of Wisconsin band. So I've kind of got two presentations packed into one here. One, I'm going to do a 2020 census update and kind of get you to where we are with the census at this point, and also to sort of describe what you can expect, so that way you can be informed census experts to help inform your communities. And then I'm going to switch gears to the Redistricting Data Program itself. I'm going to talk about the history of the program. And then I'm going to, since I have the luxury of being in front of folks who deal with GIS and deal with manipulating data, I have a very it's high level, but it's something that we wouldn't normally discuss in the general audience. So I'm going to go into the weeds a little bit about what happens to the data that is sent to us before it comes back out to you. As my one geographic lead calls it, it's what you get doesn't look like what you gave us. So the basics of the census. It's mandated by Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, and the purpose is for us to conduct a census of population and housing so that we can perform basic functions like apportioning Congress. But what is the census really about? It's really about several different things. One, it's about power. The apportionment of Congress, the seats from which congressional members are elected, and that part's required in the Constitution. But then it's also about allocating power through redistricting, withdrawing congressional and state legislative districts, school districts, voting precincts, library districts, fire districts. If there's districts from which people are elected, you're most likely using census redistricting data to create those districts, to craft those districts. And that's, I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the discussion. It's also about money. Our last estimate was that $675 billion in federal funds a year are redistributed back to the states based on census numbers. And then that doesn't even take into account the amount that state government then sends back to localities. And it's about knowledge. It's just knowing what the country's like, what your district's like, what your county's like, what your town's like. But also the knowledge that's needed for things like citing businesses, for nonprofits to plan support for areas that their area of interest, for making planning decisions as far as where to put roads, where to put schools, what size should the schools be. So the approach we took to the 2020 census, and this is something if you've ever seen a census presentation, you will hear this statement, is to get a complete and accurate count where we count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. And I'm sure as geographers you can respect that in the right place. We also have to do so in a very safe and secure environment. We're using best practices. We're making sure that our data is always encrypted, whether it's on a server, whether it's in transit. But we also wanted to really make this census the easiest and most convenient census for people to respond. There has been a historic trend of less and less self-response for surveys in general, not just the census, but multiple surveys that are done both in the private and public sector. And so we wanted to make this easier and convenient so that folks felt that there was less of a barrier to getting that self-response. And we started off with 4 key innovation areas. One was re-engineering address canvassing. Address canvassing is the operation where in past censuses we would send out a small army of people to go around and verify every single address in America. They'd walk the streets, they'd make the marks on their maps, we'd make sure that it ended up in our database. This decade we decided to use technology, the power of GIS, the power of imagery, the power of local authoritative data, refreshes from the Postal Service, and we were able to take all of that information in and then also do quality checks out in the field to identify 70% of the country where we had a nice, stable, accurate database of addresses. So then when we had to do the address canvassing part, we didn't have to put as many people on the street. We wanted to optimize self-response. This goes to making it convenient and easy. We are using the internet to try to reduce the need for people to fill out paper forms, and also to reduce the need for us to process paper forms. We're using administrative records and third-party data to help augment our activities. We're using it in multiple areas, including routing, time of day for approaching households, filling in missing information when we do editing and imputation. And then we re-engineered our field operations. We use technology to make them more efficient, trying to reduce the brick and mortar footprint that we have to put out on the ground in order to accomplish our mission. So I'm going to start here. These first 3 items I'm just going to highlight because these are things that have already happened. So the census is already underway. The census is happening today. So conduct in-field address canvassing. So I was mentioning that as the re-engineering of it. This operation actually completed October 11th of 2019. It took 32,000 people hired, and they canvassed 50 million addresses. They did it so efficiently using GIS tools that were developed for the Census Bureau that we actually had a 31% improvement in efficiency. It was managed from only 39 offices instead of 151. The operation was also under budget. So you can see the power of as Jack was saying yesterday, the things that you do really make a difference. Working with GIS and working with data and the tools that are being developed and the techniques that are being developed are allowing for improvements in the things that we do as a society. Implementing, and also it allowed us to test our rapid response. Due to Hurricane Dorian, we were allowed to put in our contingency plans and test how we would react, not if, but when some sort of natural disaster, whether it's fire, flood, earthquake, hurricane, happens during the course of the census. One great milestone for the address canvassing operation was that we had 27 IT systems that were fully integrated and tested through this process. We had automated systems for hiring and training staff. We were able to distribute devices for people to use for those thousands of people that we hired and get them back. That's an important part. We were able to re-engineer that field operation using new operational control systems. This is what I alluded to a minute ago. We work very highly with several national companies like UPS and others to learn how they were routing their package deliveries so that we could then route our enumerators in the most efficient manner possible, both for the efficiency of gathering that information on those addresses. We were able to automate time and expense reports for employees. Believe it or not, for the 2010 census, the crew leaders and the enumerators, or the address canvassers, would meet like a Starbucks or a McDonald's, and they would exchange timesheets, and they would exchange workload papers. This time around, that wasn't necessary. We did this all online. And then we had an enhanced GIS application that we had specifically developed that helped us validate and update our addresses when folks were out in the field. So you may have already seen a few advertisements around about the census, but hold on tight, you're about to see a lot more. We started our advertising campaign in January, more targeted to hard-to-count communities and to rural Alaska, but that's going to pick up steam here. We have this awareness education campaign to try to make sure people know what is the census, how often is the census, when is the census happening. So we call that our awareness education campaign. That's going to go through March. But then we'll have the motivation, trying to get people to self-respond. The best thing people can do to help the census is to self-respond. And we're going to have those advertisements out from March to May. And then we'll have a reminder campaign to try to get that last group of people that haven't self-responded to do so before we have to move into follow-up operations. We're using all sorts of media this decade. We're using print, TV, radio, but we're also heavily using social media, digital media. We're relying very heavily on local media. Almost 50% of our advertising buys will be through local media because we want to make sure we reach people in their communities from the voices that they trust. We've already started counting people. We've done the remote Alaska enumeration. That began on January 21st. This is about 2 months before it starts for the lower 48 and for about 90% of Alaska proper. But we have to get to those communities because they disperse early in the spring out to their traditional hunting and fishing grounds, and so it's much easier to be able to get them when they're congregated in sort of their towns and villages. So we've started that. But most of Alaska and most of the country will be enumerated starting next month. And that gets us to the beginning of self-response. This is when you will be asked to participate in the census, and this is expected to start on March 12th. You can respond any way you want. We highly encourage people to use the internet. That saves the problem of having to send a form to a paper data capture center, have that run through optical character recognition, anything that's not recognized, having to go to a clerk. If you put it into your internet self-response instrument, it'll go directly into our systems. So that's highly encouraged. But we do allow for people to respond by mail, should they so choose, or over the phone. And this is new. Last decade, we didn't have telephone operators, but all a telephone operator could do was assist you with information to help you fill out the form to send in. But our operators this time have been trained and have the tools available that if you want to give your census response over the phone, they can actually take the responses for you as if you were filing the form yourself. Our internet self-response is optimized for smartphones and mobile devices. So if you were stuck on a bus or on a train and you see a census ad that reminds you, oh, I didn't fill out my census form, you can pull out your phone or pull out your laptop or pull out your smartphone or your tablet, and you should be able to fill out the census. Now, each mailing that we send you for the census has a unique census identifier, and we do encourage people to use that identifier. It makes the processing of the data run more smoothly, but it's not required. If you don't have that number, or let's say you have time to fill out your census and the number's at home and you're, like I said, stuck on the bus, you can still fill it out, and we'll do matching to make sure that we attach that response to the appropriate household. And you can respond in different languages. We have over 12 non-English languages that the Internet Self-Response Instrument can handle. And then we also have another 59 total languages that we provide language support materials. So if someone needs help in a different language to go fill out the census for their family or for their household, they'll have these tools available. And this is what you can expect to see. Starting March 12th to March 20th, and these are mailings that occur in phases. This is the first mailing. Most households will just receive a letter with that census number on it, that respondent ID, saying, please go to the internet and respond to the census. There's some households that we've identified that would have either have low broadband access or have populations that are less likely to use the internet. They'll receive a letter and a questionnaire at that time. And then the following week, the 16th to the 24th, we'll get a reminder letter to everybody in the country. Then we move into a qualified mailing strategy where if you haven't responded by March 26th, we have a reminder postcard, and that'll go to every household. If we still haven't heard from you by April 8th, you'll get a letter and a paper questionnaire. So I just want to pause here for a second because I think it's very important that people realize that if you do not respond, you will get a paper questionnaire. So anyone who wants a paper questionnaire to respond will get one if we haven't heard from them through one of the phone or the internet by this point. Some people get very concerned that we're only sending paper questionnaires initially to some households, but every household will have the opportunity to get a paper questionnaire if it's needed. And then finally, we'll have a final reminder postcard before we move into subsequent operations. Cybersecurity has been a huge focus for the Census Bureau. Our data are encrypted, they're safe, they're secure. We've been protecting data for a long time, and we've been working hard, knowing that this is an additional challenge now that we have an internet self-response instrument. We've been partnering with federal intelligence communities. We've been working to identify bad actors and bad avenues from which they might want to react, and they've been working to help us to protect our data as well. We have systems and processes in place to identify attacks, to protect against them, to detect them, to respond rapidly, and how to recover from them should one occur or when one occurs. It's also very important that people recognize that the census data is safe, it's secure, the responses are confidential, they can't be used against you, they can't be shared with other federal agencies. They are protected by law, some very strict protective laws that have been tested over time in the courts and have always held strong. Some other things that we're aware that there will be phishing attacks. People may get something in the mail that asks for a social security number or a donation or be related to a political party or something about a bank account or a credit card. The Census Bureau does not ask for that information. If you see that question in something you receive in the mail or from someone who calls you on the phone, that is not the Census Bureau. And we think that's important that everyone know that and that they share that with their neighbors and friends. So once we finish the self-response portion, so after that final reminder letter goes out the door, we'll send about 500,000 people out on the streets to start visiting houses that haven't responded. In most cases, census workers will take up to 6 attempts to resolve cases. It may take less if they identify the house as being vacant, but we'll go through that process. And this will run from May of 2020 through July of 2020. And as we said, I said earlier, we count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. We have many special operations to make sure that we count absolutely everyone. We have a special operation which we do sort of as a blitz across the country where we count the homeless, and we count them by going to areas where they're known to congregate and to service areas like soup kitchens and transitional shelters. And we sort of do a blitz and get them all at once, so that way we make sure we're counting them once and we're not over-counting them by spreading this operation over multiple days. We deliver questionnaires to people who have been displaced. If people are residing in FEMA trailers or some other area, we make sure that they get questionnaires. We count highly mobile populations, such as those living in campgrounds and recreational vehicle parks and circuses. If Cirque du Soleil is in town, we're going to have to make sure we count them and we make sure we get in touch with them. We go to remote areas where people don't have mail service, so they wouldn't be getting our letters and our responses. send a person to leave a form at the door for them to respond. But even they, or anyone else, no matter what their living arrangement, they can respond online, by mail, or by the phone. And how can you help? I mean, the Census Bureau is a huge civic engagement. It's a partnership between the citizenry and the public of the country and the Census Bureau. Right now we're hiring. If you know of anyone who would be interested in a temporary, full-time, or flexible part-time job, we have competitive pay rates, which were recently raised. The economy's doing very well, so it's a mixed blessing. It's difficult for us to hire, but we're doing our best. And you can go to 2020census.gov/jobs if you know anyone who's interested. But then what you can really do is help us to reach the public, help get the word out. If you have a newsletter at your office, you can put something in there about the 2020 census to help raise people's awareness and put some informational links. You can stress to your friends about how it's safe, secure, and confidential. You can share your user stories. This is really where I think as data users, you can have really a strong effect. People, when they realize how the census data is then used in practical applications that affect their daily lives, I think that is a powerful motivator to get people to self-respond. And self-responding, we know, is the highest quality data at the lowest cost. So sharing those stories would be valuable. And then help us recruit other partners. We have an extensive partnership campaign to try to get the trusted voices out in the community to help spread the word about the census. If you belong to an organization or you know people who do, you could mention to them that if they go to the 2020census.gov, there's an entire sub-page around partnership and how to engage with the Census Bureau. So that's my spiel of the 2020 census. So we're kind of caught up to where we are with the census, and you have an idea of how you'll experience it from the outside. But then I'm going to switch to the Redistricting Data Program. And this program does have some things that occur during the census, but really it's the highlight or the crescendo of the Redistricting Data Program occurs at the tail end. And I'll get to that in a moment. The reason the Redistricting Data Program exists is because of Public Law 94-171. I think Tony mentioned it when he was doing his introduction for me. This law was passed in 1975, and it basically outlines a mission for the Census Bureau to provide the officers of public bodies having initial responsibility for the legislative apportionment or districting of each state an opportunity to identify the geographic areas for which specific tabulations of population are desired and to deliver those tabulations in a timely manner. So what this does is it basically sets up two main requirements on the Census Bureau. One is we have to allow the states to identify the areas that they need tabulations for and what types of tabulations. And that traditionally has been census blocks and voting districts. Voting districts is the Census Bureau's generic umbrella term for wards, precincts, that type of geography. And then we also collect legislative and congressional districts as part of that mission. Then the other part is the Census Bureau is required to deliver the data to the states, these folks who have the initial responsibility for redistricting, no later than 1 year from census day. So that means by April 1st of 2021, this data will be out for every state across the country. There's a very important parameter to conducting all this work. It has to be conducted in a nonpartisan manner. That's written into the law. And the way we do that is we work at the beginning of the program with each state's legislature and governor to get both parties and both chambers and the governor to all sign off on someone who can represent the program to the Census Bureau in a nonpartisan manner. It doesn't necessarily mean the person is nonpartisan. It just means that the person can act in a nonpartisan manner for the state, and that both parties agree that this person is capable of doing so. So the law being passed in 1975, the very first Redistricting Data Program happened in 1980. This is a lot different than what we do today. So for that iteration, we only had the voting districts as part of the program. And we had 14 states that submitted their voting districts to us, And then we used those voting districts to help design what became the enumeration districts or census blocks to match to those areas. If you're not that familiar with census history, in 1980, we only produced census blocks for urban areas with populations of 10,000 or more. The rest of the country did not have blocks. So we had things called enumeration districts, which were much larger and usually involved trying to respect legal boundaries, political boundaries, things like that. We had 17 other states that worked in something called a block areas program, and they gave us the blocks that they would want for their voting districts, and then we aggregated those up for them when we reported out voting district tabulations. We had 7 states who just would let us design our enumeration districts. And then we had 5 states that said that they sort of saw the future and said, we need block level data for the whole state to be able to do this right. And they actually contracted with the Census Bureau and paid the Census Bureau to develop blocks for their entire states. The remainder did not participate because this is a voluntary program. The states don't have to provide voting districts to the Census Bureau. It's up to them if they want to choose to do so. We did have a requirement, though, when they were giving us boundaries for these geographic entities, they had to use visible features, things that could be seen in the landscape. So then in 1990, this is the first decade that we had Tiger. We were able to generate, because we had Tiger, we were able to generate blocks for the nation. And we implemented something called the Block Boundary Suggestion Project. This is the first time we did this. We tested it just prior to the 1990 census, and it was successful, so we went ahead and implemented it for the 1990 census. And this is actually where the state liaison can go into the census geography and they can make suggestions about things they want as block boundaries. And if you're familiar with census data, census blocks are the Legos that build up every other piece of geography within the census universe. It's the smallest area over which we tabulate data. And so the individuals can go in and they can identify things that the Census Bureau would not necessarily hold as a block boundary, like a pipeline or a power line. And then the Census Bureau, when we create the blocks for that decennial, will actually hold those. And we also have the voting district project. We again conducted that, and we also picked up state legislative districts at that time, so we could start including those in our tabulations. We had 7 months for folks to do the work, and people did it on paper maps with colored pencils. So you can imagine we would send out reams and reams of paper maps along with the colored pencils, and then we would get maps back, and then we would have to go and try to digitize those in our National Processing Center to make sure that we could accommodate the suggestions that we were getting. So in 2000, we again had the Block Boundary Suggestion Program. I forgot to mention, there were no new features allowed during ATV collection, so you couldn't add a new road, you couldn't add anything to the census geography, you just had to use what was there. So in 2000, we had the Block Boundary Suggestion Project, we had the Voting District Project. There's a little shorter time for the work to be done. Participation was primarily using paper maps and colored pencils, although we did allow people to use a polygon equivalency file for submissions, but no feature updates were allowed. And people could start to use what we call non-visible features in 2000, but only in a very small way. If it was something like a congressional district boundary or a city boundary that was moving through space, it was not following a physical feature, they were allowed to use those for their voting districts. In 2010, this was sort of our big revolution. For those of you who use census data for a long time, you remember that 2010 was when the Tiger Geographic Database underwent a massive precisional update. We had a contract and we basically shipped Tiger in pieces to a company that we hired, and they realigned it to imagery and to other authoritative data to greatly improve the depiction of the geography in census. If you ever get a chance to go back and look at 1990 Tiger data, you'll see it was very notional geography. So in the 2010 program, we started collecting state legislative districts. This is when we first began to collect them on a continuous basis. Prior to that, when I mentioned that we were collecting state legislative districts, we just did it for the decennial census. But we began collecting it, we collected it in 2006, and then after the 2010 census, we started collecting on a 2-year cycle along with the congressional districts. We did put the voting district project and the block boundary suggestion project together in a single phase. There was an initial delineation where folks could give us both the block boundary suggestions and the voting districts. And then we did a verification, and then we were done. It was all digital. It was the first time it was all digital, so we got rid of paper maps and the colored pencils, which was a great improvement. The Census Bureau created a custom GIS software that we provided to the states. The states were allowed to use that custom software that we developed, or they could use their own GIS to do the delineation of the work. However, because of our adjustment to working with an all-digital program, we did require the states to use our software that we developed when they verified the data. And it was also the first time that non-visible boundaries were allowed for PTDs wherever they were needed. So because we were all digital, we finally allowed folks to draw in whatever voting district boundary they needed to have. And as long as that invisible line was being used as a voting district boundary, we kept it. So now we get to the 2020 voting district program. We split phase 1 and phase 2 apart. That was, putting them together was not very well received. There was a lot less time for people to do the work, and most people who work on this program for us from the state side also have a day job, so it was a lot to ask. But also the only reason we put them together was because of that big realignment project. We wanted to make sure that there was enough time that every state had the advantage of their data being realigned. And since that wasn't a concern for the 2020 census, we were able to split them back apart. And so the phases for the 2020 program are the block boundary suggestion project, the voting district project, the data delivery that I'm going to talk about a little more, and then collection of new plans. So as soon as the census is over, the states do the heavy lifting of their redistricting, and then we reach back out to them to get the new congressional plans and the new state legislative district plans, because we now have the American Community Survey, which is an ongoing survey that we're publishing data for every year. So we want to make sure we have current boundaries so we're producing current data that's relevant. And then we do a big review of the program itself. We try to look at what's going on in redistricting, what's changed in the legal landscape, what needs were not met in the current program, and we put together actually a formal report that we use as a lessons learned and as a look forward, and that becomes the guiding principles for the next decennial production. So what was specific about that's different for the 2020 program? We had the block boundary suggestion project, which I mentioned was from 2016 to 2017. The voting district project is actually going on right now. We're in the final second round of verification. We were able to add a short window right here at the doorstep of the decennial census so that folks could make sure that their precincts and their other geographies, if there were relationships that were important, could be maintained. This was something that had been requested repeatedly, and we were able to find the time for that. We developed a new custom software tool that's using open source software, and we supplied that to the states. But this time it was fully an optional tool. We recognize that there's a lot of GIS shops out there that are invested with skills and software and the tools that they use on a daily basis, and we didn't want to force people to use this census software, so we made sure that that was one of our guiding principles as we developed the program. This is also a fully digital exchange through shapefiles or block equivalency files, and we added a lot of extra stuff. We allowed updates to area landmarks, that's things like state parks, national parks. We put in military areas. All those things are what we call area landmarks in census geography terms, and we can take those updates. You can add new features. You could add roads, you could add pipelines, you could add trolley lines. If there was some sort of feature that you felt was important to have in the Tiger geography, we would allow you to add that. And then something that had been requested for 20 years, we were finally able to coordinate by making changes in the way the program is organized to allow for suggested updates to legal boundaries. So when folks are in there drawing their voting districts or adding new features or looking at individual lines to mark as a block boundary, for decades they've been saying, well, this place boundary is not correct. This place had an annexation last year, why isn't that here? And there's a formal program called BAS, or Boundary and Annexation Survey, that collects those. So we were able to coordinate with the BAS and allow these, I say suggested, legal boundary updates to come in through the Redistricting Data Program, and then we would send them through the BAS pipeline, and the BAS would then do some of the heavy lifting to make sure that they got the ordinance numbers and ask something official to sign off. So that was one of our big innovations, which I think is really helpful for data quality for 2020. We'll see. We had lessons learned from past decennials that folks need to see what we're going to produce from the 2020 census early because they need to build systems to do redistricting. And usually redistricting starts for most states with the receipt of the data. So they have to be able to get up and running right on the first day of the data receipt. So for from our 2018 end-to-end test, we created prototype data for most of the products that we're going to produce. So the test was done in Providence, Rhode Island, and we followed the structure of what we're going to do for 2020. So we have shapefiles, maps, and block assignment files. I know you know what shapefiles are. The maps that we do are PDF maps. We do county block maps, voting district, state legislative district maps, tract maps, school district maps, a lot of different versions. And I'll tell you one of the reasons why we still put out PDF maps that can be printed. After 2010, I had numerous calls from many small towns across the country who had gotten a letter from the Secretary of State's office or some other state agency that said, I have to redistrict my town. What does that mean? And I have a $500 budget. How do I do it? So for these small areas, we were able to guide them to the block maps. We were able to guide them to the American Fact Finder tool, where they could pull down a table of the block level data. They could look at the block map, and then they could do an old-fashioned redistricting, pen and paper redistricting, with the resources that they had. So we still think that these maps are very important, not necessarily at the state level, but for those smaller communities that still have an obligation to do redistricting. And then one that we didn't produce for the prototype, is because we don't have 2020 blocks yet, is that we have block-to-block relationship file. And this is a crosswalk. This mostly affects places that have to deal with Section 2 remedies to the Voting Rights Act. They have to avoid retrogression of the district. This allows them to chain the data between the two decennials, since we throw out the blocks and regenerate them each decennial. As far as the data, if you've worked with census redistricting data in the past, most of this should look very familiar to you. The first 5 tables are exactly what we produced in 2010. It's race for 18 and over, voting age, Hispanic or Latino or non-Hispanic or Latino by race, and then the same for the voting age. And then an occupancy status table, which gives you the housing unit counts, vacant or occupied. All of these are available at the block level, so the smallest geography for which census is going to produce data. And then we've added a new one. It's a group quarters population by group quarters type. This will give you the total population in a series of group quarters. Remember, census terminology of group quarters is things like military barracks, nursing home, prison, those types of areas. And the reason we've included this is there are several states that modify their census data prior to conducting their redistricting. There are some states that remove military and students. Hawaii removes non-resident military and students and creates a resident population base. Kansas used to move military and students out of their college and barracks areas and put them back in the towns from which they were from. They did just pass a constitutional amendment to remove that requirement. And there's 7 states that take prisoners out of the prison and put them at their pre-incarceration address and create a new set of base data from which to do the redistricting. So this is a tool to help those states deal with that. The timing of this, in February of 2019, we put out those geographic prototype products. They're available on my office's website, which you'll see on my thank you slide, the web address. Then we also had the tabulation data, so people could see the structure there. That came out in March 2019, so you can see we were keeping with that cycle of 1 year from Census Day, but we were 1 year from the 2018 end-to-end test day. And then the official data start rolling out at the end of November of 2020, and will conclude by February 1st of 2021. And that'll be all the geographic products that I mentioned. The tabulations themselves will start on February 18th is the current plan, and will finish by March 31st. And that again, as they're cleared by Census for release after their review, we'll then be sending them to folks. And they should be coming out on a regular cycle of a block of states every Thursday in the weeks between those dates there. So the next thing I was going to do is just sort of high-level-wise go into what happens to census data. And a lot of this will just make common sense to you, but I'll show you also where things may be a little more controversial. So when we're processing our voting districts, there's several things we have to check for. We have to check to correct for errors, and we have to check to make sure that the data we receive aligns to the Tiger database. We have to check for coverage gaps. Voting districts in the census universe, in the census Tiger database, are required to have wall-to-wall coverage within a county. So you can't have voting districts in a county unless the voting district cover the entire county. So if we find an area that doesn't have coverage assigned, we will have to fix it. Usually it's simple. Usually it's an area that's surrounded by an area that is already a voting district, and if it doesn't look like a voting district itself, that it's too small to stand on its own, we'll just assign it to the area that it's surrounded by. But something like this, we would actually reach back out to the state to make the correction. We oftentimes, because we start with the previous decade's voting districts, and voting districts are very ephemeral, so they probably changed multiple times over the course of the decade, so they're being redrawn, and there's a lot of little faces in Map Tiger, and so sometimes something gets left behind. So typically, we would want to get rid of this and dissolve it into the area around it. Now we have to be very careful, because there are legitimate, believe it or not, voting districts. There could be something that's as small as what you see on the screen. The state of Florida has a requirement that all people who vote have to have an address. So if you're homeless, your address is the courthouse. And so the courthouse itself, just the little courthouse, is a voting district. So we have to be aware of what's going on in each state, what each state's requirements are, before we make these changes. Another common one is when we find multiple cycle voting districts. Usually voting districts have to be contained or contiguous, but sometimes we get things that are not, and it doesn't look like they're supposed to be, or it looks like they should be contiguous. So we would do a little research, we may reach out to the state depending on it, but if you have something little like this, it looks like just the face was missed because it was so small, and depending on what scale someone was digitizing, they may have just missed it if they didn't see it, so we have to clean those up. We do allow for unassigned voting districts that counts towards that full county coverage. But we typically don't allow it overland. It's to fill in things like the Atlantic Ocean or Lake Michigan or things like that. So when we see something like this where someone has left the entire highway unassigned, what we'll do is we'll collapse those voting districts into that center line. Now this is where it gets a little controversial. So the Census Bureau, part of why we do this digital exchange and we create custom software is because we're really asking the data users who are providing data to us is to conflate their data to the census geography. So there's a couple reasons why. And here's going to be some of the things that we would change if we saw them. So this is an example, and the picture doesn't really tell anything here, it's just a pretty picture. But I'll describe the situation. The redistricting person submits a voting district change and a BAS, a legal place boundary change. When that comes to the Census Bureau, we pull that legal boundary change, we send it through the BAS processing process, because they have to get the BAS elected official to sign off, they have to get the ordinance numbers all from the record, because Census is the legal keeper at the federal level of place boundaries. So they have to have a lot of documentation. And let's say that a good example, we received this during this latest round of updates, and it doesn't go into effect until January 31st of 2020. Well, all the legal place boundaries that go into the census universe for the 2020 census have to have a January 1st of 2020 effective date. So that just gets shelved, which means that boundary change didn't happen, which means that relationship that we have between the voting district and the place no longer matches. So we would have to move that voting district back to the place as it is to maintain that relationship. If we get these files in time, we try to consult first with the state, but if not, we have to rely on a series of rules that we've developed as we've learned about each state's particular geography situations about whether things should nest or not nest. And then there's the opposite. Let's say we get a voting district and someone sends in a BAS change through the BAS program that we don't know about, and that gets accepted. Now we've also got the broken relationship between the voting district and the place, and if there's supposed to be one, we would need to move that. When you're reshaping lines in our programs, the way we have to do that is we have to do that with an add delete. So we have to add in the new line, delete the old line. So if the movement of that edge from one space to another is not a greater distance than our 7.6 meter accuracy, then we will not accept it, because Tiger isn't that accurate. It's only accurate up to 7.6 meters. So if someone puts in something that's 12 feet away, the moving it is not warranted based on the accuracy of the database itself. The same thing happens when someone puts in an invisible line that they think is correcting something. And we would look at it and say, well, there's an existing line that's within that 7.6 meters. They're both non-visible. There's no housing involved. And that's another thing that we look at quite often with these is there housing involved? We don't want to move population. But there's no housing involved, so we would reject the add line and just keep it on the census line. And one of the problems that we encounter is that there's a lot of folks who want to use a center line. We now have a lot of double line roads, which you've probably noticed, and people want to have the center line down the median of those double line roads. And since we only have that 7.6 meter accuracy, if we try to insert this edge into our database, and there's nodes up and down these segments, we end up with what we call a ladder. Your add line would end up zigzagging across, back and forth across those two lanes, which would make for poor geography and poor blocks when the blocks are created. So we discourage that as well. If lines that are submitted that don't match up to the imagery that we have, the Census Bureau keeps a constant image catalog that is constantly being refreshed. I think the oldest imagery in that catalog would be 2 years old, and are constantly replacing it as new imagery becomes available. If it doesn't match, so in this case where we have the pink lines where the census boundary is, and this is a manufactured slide, this isn't actually really a submission, this is just for example. The green lines would be the submission. We would have to reject that because it wasn't lining up with the imagery. We want to try to maintain the quality of Tiger. And then there's slivers. We are constantly looking for slivers. And this is sort of an example. We have the BTD boundary going down the road center line. There's an incorporated place right there. And we know that BTDs usually have a relationship with an incorporated place in this regard. So if we don't do anything about those slivers, we're going to end up creating 4 census blocks, 3 of which would be narrow, small, zero population, small area. And so what we would do is conflate the BTD to the place boundary so that we just have one. So we know that this sometimes will create a mismatch between the local data and the map Tiger data if you're trying to do spatial comparisons. But it's important to understand this typically doesn't affect housing units. We have the ability internally to look to see if housing units are in the area affected, and we use that as part of our decision-making process. It should have little impact on your data, but it has a huge impact on map Tiger quality. We weren't able to do a sliver review last decade, and so if you know, or if you have been been working with census data for a while. We went from just over 8 million blocks up to 11 million blocks, just because we created so many things like that after 2010. And we're working very hard to eliminate some of that to make the data easier for everyone to use. We do also scrub for attributes. The only thing I was going to point out here on this slide is that we have an indicator for actual and pseudo for voting districts. Sometimes it's just not possible for a state to give us a voting district using the edges or by drawing in the edges that they need to the universe, and so they can mark it as a pseudo if they're approximating their voting district, or if they're doing a super precinct because of some other considerations. And then we also go through and scrub for the Block Boundary Suggestion Project has a special flag that tells us not to hold things as block boundaries, but there are certain things that we have to hold as block boundaries. And so we'll go through and we'll make sure that we scrub those as well. So I think with that, I will go ahead and just end my comments, but I would be happy to take questions if anyone has any about census or redistricting.
The census that you're undertaking just sounds massively huge. I'm curious, how big is the data once it's all collected? Terabytes?
I actually don't know the answer. I mean, I know that our systems, I think, hold petabytes of data, but that's because each year, or twice a year, we actually benchmark our data set, and so we constantly are building a stack of both the geography and our address list. Even as addresses get updated or moved, we keep a history. So there's data upon data upon data. Oftentimes, like, one of the examples, and this is not something that takes up a lot of space, but sort of gives you an example of the amount of data we have, is we'll get suggested name changes for roads, and people will send them and we'll put them in. And they never see them because there's a primary name, and then there'll be 15 other names that we receive for the same road. And so we maintain all that data if we have it, if we get it from an authoritative source. But I know it's big. I just couldn't tell you exactly how big. Yes, sir.
I was just kind of curious on the imagery you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
being less than 2 years old. What are the sources that you have for that? Is there a resolution tolerance?
I don't know the specifics about the resolution. We get it from one of our sister agencies, one of the intelligence agencies. They provide us with imagery. I want to say NGA. It's not really an area I work directly in, so I'm not certain.
Do you know if it's not public domain then?
It's not public domain. We have had discussions about wanting to make it available through these tools that we provide to our partners to use, like that custom software. We thought it'd be great if they could see the same imagery we're looking at, and that way it would make it easier for us to align that geography. I don't know where those conversations are. I think as with anything with the federal government that involves multiple agencies, it takes a lot of discussion, a lot of time to get through that process and make something like that happen. All right, well, thank you all very much. I appreciate it.